The narrator begins the story with a detailed account of their visit to the sacrifice poles, which are a part of a ritualistic practice they follow. The poles are adorned with various animal heads, and the narrator is meticulous in maintaining them. On this particular day, while adjusting a mouse head on one of the poles, the narrator notices the local policeman, Diggs, arriving on his bike and heading toward the house. The narrator watches him from a distance, feeling a sense of foreboding but also a certain confidence, as they feel in tune with the factory that guides them. This mysterious factory is hinted to be a presence or force that the narrator relies on for insight and direction. The tension rises as the policeman's visit is connected to a significant event, the escape of the narrator's half-brother, Eric, from a hospital. The narrator, although aware of the situation, doesn't reveal their knowledge, but instead keeps a cool, almost detached demeanor. There is a sense of forewarning in the air, which the narrator seems to embrace as part of their routine, as if the escape was inevitable. The narrator's relationship with their father is distant, cold, and filled with subtle power struggles, with their father's control over their life being defined by routines and odd rituals. The mention of Eric's escape stirs something in the narrator, but they keep their composure, reflecting on their own life and the fractured family dynamic. The writing technique here is notable for its blend of eerie suspense and dark humor, as the narrator reveals personal details with a chilling detachment. The mention of the sacrifice poles is symbolic, representing not only physical markers but emotional and psychological boundaries, as the narrator's own sense of control over their environment is evident in these objects. The father's obsession with measurements and his eccentricities, like his belief in the earth being a Mobius strip, highlight the strange, almost surreal world the narrator inhabits. There is a stark contrast between the narrator's cold efficiency in maintaining their environment, the detached way they handle their father's cryptic remarks, and the looming threat of Eric's return. The narrator's relationship with Eric, who is painted as both a source of tension and connection, hints at deeper, darker family secrets and sets the stage for an unfolding drama rooted in trauma and a disturbing sense of normalcy. The stark, almost clinical descriptions are laced with a sense of lurking danger, creating a captivating and unsettling atmosphere that propels the reader forward. In the snake park, the narrator continues their solitary, unsettling existence on the island, engaging in bizarre and chilling activities that reflect their troubled psyche. They begin the day by placing the remains of a wasp into a matchbox, wrapped in an old photograph of Eric, their brother. The image of Eric's mother, Mary, who died during childbirth, is a poignant symbol, linking the past and the present as well as Eric's tragic history. The narrator reflects on Eric's severe migraines and attributes them to his traumatic birth, painting a dark picture of fate's cruelty. The narrator's day is filled with strange rituals, such as visiting the sacrifice poles and performing acts of violence against nature, like kicking a jellyfish. There's an odd sense of calm in their routine, which is interrupted by the anticipation of Eric's return. Despite the apparent foreboding nature of the situation, the narrator seems detached, almost eager for the chaos Eric's return will bring. They are also preoccupied with their past wars, involving miniature soldiers, revealing their deep need for control and destruction. The narrator's relationship with their father is depicted as cold and distant. While their father prepares to leave the house, likely due to Eric's escape, their interactions are terse and lacking emotional warmth. This sense of alienation is mirrored in the narrator's own coldness, particularly when reflecting on their violent actions, like their past acts of killing, including Blythe, their cousin. The recounting of Blythe's death is deeply unsettling, filled with a disturbing sense of satisfaction. The snake incident, where the narrator places a snake in Blythe's artificial leg, leading to Blythe's fiery demise, is chilling in its casual cruelty. The narrator's pride in their ability to deceive and manipulate others, including Eric, highlights their disturbing worldview. The narrator's dark humor and lack of remorse throughout these events offer an unsettling glimpse into their twisted perspective on life and death. The snake, the explosion, and the intense violence serve as metaphors for the narrator's inner turmoil and desire to control their world, even if that control is exercised through destruction. The recurring theme of violence is deeply tied to their family history, with past deaths and actions echoing in their present behavior. The narrative tone is stark and detached, with moments of dry humor that only deepen the horror of what is being described. As the story unfolds, the narrator's strange blend of detachment, ritual, and violence becomes more pronounced, leaving readers with a lingering sense of unease about the character's future actions. The symbolic significance of the snake park, the burning of the rabbits, and the emotional isolation all contribute to the dark, foreboding atmosphere, hinting at more disturbing revelations to come. In the bunker, the narrator continues their eerie, introspective journey through their isolated world, detailing their complex feelings toward women and the sea. They express a bitter resentment for both, seeing women as weak and insignificant, and the sea as an unpredictable, destructive force that undermines their carefully constructed world. This disdain sets the tone for their dark worldview. The narrator's relationship with the sea is particularly notable, as they respect its power while also viewing it as an equal, a theme that carries an undercurrent of tension and conflict. The day begins with the narrator's detailed personal hygiene routine. It's almost ritualistic, with each action performed with a strict, almost obsessive precision. From their shower to their shave, every step is carried out with the same meticulousness, hinting at their need for control over their environment. This obsession with order contrasts with the chaotic, violent tendencies lurking within them, as seen in their earlier actions involving the sacrifice poles and their relationship with death and destruction. Their dislike for the mundane and their inclination toward dark rituals, like the treatment of wasps, reinforces the foreboding atmosphere of the narrative. The narrator ventures outside, the landscape cold and damp, mirroring the internal chill they seem to carry. They pass the familiar wrecks and debris on the island, maintaining their routine of dominance over the environment. The imagery of the wasps, the sacrifice poles, and even their interactions with the animals, like the rabbits, paints a picture of a young person who derives power from life and death, manipulating everything around them to fit their desires. When the narrator reaches the bunker, their true self begins to emerge in the form of disturbing rituals. The bunker, with its altar and collection of skulls, becomes the setting for these grim ceremonies. Lighting candles inside the skull of Old Saul, watching wasps burn to death in their waxy prisons, the narrator seems almost pleased with the destructive power they wield. These moments symbolize their need to exert control, both over their environment and the creatures that inhabit it. The contrast between the ritualistic calm of the bunker and the violent undertones of their actions highlights the narrator's complex psyche, someone who finds peace in destruction and meaning in suffering. Later, the narrator speaks with Eric on the phone, and it's clear that their relationship is strained and filled with tension. Eric's erratic behavior and disturbing comments about eating dogs reflect the growing instability between the siblings, while the narrator's frustration with him shows their inability to cope with the chaotic nature of Eric's personality. This interaction serves as a powerful reminder of the emotional distance between the brothers and the disturbed state of their family. The narrative blends ritual, violence, and isolation in a way that grips the reader, while the narrator's unsettling calmness in the face of dark actions creates a chilling effect. It's a powerful exploration of control, chaos, and the human capacity for cruelty, all presented through the lens of a disturbed young mind, deeply entrenched in their own bizarre rituals. In the bomb circle, the narrator reflects on their own fragmented identity, comparing their internal conflicts to a government with multiple opposing factions. They describe parts of themselves that feel guilt and remorse, like over the deaths of Blith, Paul, and Esmeralda, and others that justify actions like taking revenge on rabbits for a single rogue male. The narrator's internal contradictions form a complex landscape where guilt and justification coexist uneasily. A naming ceremony for a new catapult marks an almost ritualistic event, where the narrator, half in contempt and half in belief, consecrates the device in a series of grotesque rituals, smeared with bodily fluids, blood, and waste. It's a powerful symbolic moment, showcasing the narrator's obsessive need for control and power. The naming is a personal act of claiming power, a reclaiming of control over the physical world, where every action, no matter how repulsive, serves to strengthen the narrator's sense of dominance over the island and its creatures. After the ceremony, the narrator ventures to the north end of the island to perform a ritualistic test for the new catapult. They fire a photograph of Paul, their sibling who they killed at a young age, into the sea as a means of safeguarding the new weapon. There's an air of superstition here, as the narrator ties their power to a belief in symbolic acts, where mistakes can render even their most cherished possessions vulnerable. The bomb circle, a physical landmark of the island, becomes a space of intense physicality for the narrator, who uses it to perform a rigorous and cathartic run. The imagery of the narrator running across the sands, pushing their body to the limits, reflects an almost manic need to exert control over their environment, an extension of the same need for dominance that drives their darker rituals. This run becomes a place where the narrator contemplates death, their actions, and their strained relationships. The circle itself is tied to the narrator's troubled past, as it is associated with the death of Paul, their brother. The violent explosion of a bomb, which the narrator remembers through a haunting flashback, is portrayed as an act of inevitability and control. The narrator's justification for the act, dressing it up in layers of logic and rationale, only adds to the coldness with which they view their own violent past. Later, as the narrator reflects on their complicated feelings about their mother, the island's harshness, and the lingering tension with Eric, their internal contradictions come to the forefront once again. They reveal their anger towards their mother, who they believe abandoned them, leaving them to be raised in a harsh, emotionally distant environment. The violence, the killings, and the superstitions all serve as a grim backdrop to the narrator's complicated and damaged psyche. They are trying, perhaps unconsciously, to build meaning in a world they have constructed through acts of power and cruelty. In this part, the theme of control, both over the island and their own body, is ever present. The narrator's internal dialogue, filled with contradictions and fragmented thoughts, paints a disturbing portrait of someone navigating the complex realms of guilt, rage, and self-delusion. The unsettling acts of violence and self-justification reflect a disturbed worldview where power, rather than morality or empathy, governs actions. The narrative masterfully builds tension, leaving the reader with an eerie sense of unease as the protagonist's psyche unravels further. In A Bunch of Flowers, the narrator recalls their past actions with chilling indifference, specifically the murder of their cousin, Esmeralda. The reasoning behind this act is disturbingly casual, an attempt to balance the gender scale in the world after having already killed 2 male children. The narrator's explanation reveals their twisted mindset, where violent acts seem to serve a higher, almost symbolic purpose. This sense of justification is not personal. They claim to have no real ill will towards Esmeralda. In fact, they even admit to enjoying her company. However, their need to even the score is framed as an irresistible force, akin to an obsessive-compulsive need for balance. The day of the killing is carefully orchestrated, starting with the narrator's preparation of a giant kite, a creation made from various salvaged materials, including tent poles and plastic sheeting. The kite becomes a tool of control, something to channel their growing urge for destruction. The narrator takes Esmeralda kiting, ostensibly to enjoy a day of harmless fun. However, as the kite soars into the air, it becomes the instrument of her demise. The narrator uses the kite strings to ensnare Esmeralda, dragging her into the sky, powerless against the wind's pull. The imagery of Esmeralda being hoisted into the air, struggling against the kite's force, is surreal and haunting. The narrator's detachment during the event, watching as the girl is swept away, adds to the chilling tone of the scene. They run after her, but the wind and the kite's power take her further than they could ever reach. In an almost symbolic gesture, Esmeralda's flowers fall from the sky, disappearing into the sea. The narrator, now alone, returns to the dunes and assumes a detached, almost performative grief, hoping the authorities will believe in their innocence. The aftermath of the murder is equally disturbing. The narrator feigns distress when found by a search party, engaging in a performance of grief that's so convincing that the adults around them believe the story of an accidental death. Their disconnection from the event is uncanny. They are less concerned with the horror of what has happened than with the idea that the authorities might uncover the truth. The narrator's manipulation of the situation, combined with their cold reflection on the event, reveals a deeply disturbed psyche. Their casual treatment of death, presented as a balance or a necessary act, offers a glimpse into their warped worldview. The recurring use of rituals, like the creation of the kite, showcases the narrator's need for control over life and death, as well as their belief in the power of symbolic acts. This chapter deepens the sense of unease surrounding the narrator, whose ability to rationalize even the most horrifying actions hints at an unsettling emotional detachment. In the Skullgrounds, the narrator delves into their family history, recounting the tumultuous return of their mother, Agnes, to the island after a long absence. This arrival, marked by her unexpected pregnancy and seemingly casual attitude towards the past, stirs deep resentment in the narrator's father. The narrative tone blends dark humor with unsettling reflections, as the narrator recounts how Agnes left him shortly after his birth, returning years later with a child of her own. Her return is depicted as a disruptive force, much to the dismay of the narrator's father, who is tasked with caring for both Agnes and the narrator. The atmosphere is thick with tension and unresolved history, especially as the narrator recalls their father's reluctant caregiving for both Agnes and the narrator while juggling the responsibilities of the house. The mention of Old Sol, the family dog, adds another layer of discomfort. The dog's aggressive behavior towards Agnes is met with a violent retaliation, as she kicks the dog, sending it off into the dunes. Later, the dog's fate is sealed when the narrator's father, in a fit of rage and frustration, strangles the animal. This act of violence, paired with the bizarre symbolism of the dog's stomach being found with the narrator's genitals, paints a disturbing picture of the narrator's early life. The symbolism of Old Sol's death is key. The dog's skull, exhumed years later from the Skullgrounds, represents a dark, personal victory for the narrator. It is linked to the narrator's belief that the dog's spirit had transferred into their half-brother, Paul. In a twisted act of control and obsession, the narrator performs rituals with the dog's skull, giving it a place of honor in the bunker. The narrator's actions, including the seemingly innocent experiments with small animals, reveal a chilling need for dominance and a warped sense of justice. They view the death of these creatures as a means of asserting control over their environment, a way to regain power over the circumstances of their life. The narrator's fragmented, erratic recounting of events, peppered with dark humor, highlights the emotional detachment that defines their character. The chapter is marked by a steady progression into the narrator's internal world, where they create rituals around death and power. The eerie calm with which they describe the murder of animals, including their half-brother Paul's eventual fate, underscores the unsettling nature of their existence. In this section, the narrator's complex relationship with death, control, and their family dynamics comes to the forefront. The dark humor and chilling reflections about the dog's skull and the narrator's twisted sense of responsibility and control contribute to the overall atmosphere of unease. The chapter deepens our understanding of the narrator's disturbed mind, building on the themes of violence, obsession, and a warped sense of justice. In Space Invaders, the narrator continues their disturbing narrative with unsettling reflections on their childhood games and the violence they've inflicted on animals. They recount various cruel activities, such as tying birds together and watching them struggle, a bizarre pastime that blends callousness with an eerie sense of control. This game, along with others like fishing for birds or detonating bombs under their nests, highlights the narrator's deep-seated need for dominance and manipulation of life and death. The narrator's complex relationship with power and control surfaces here, using animals for their own twisted form of amusement while seeking deeper meanings or satisfaction in their actions. There's an undeniable irony to the brutality of these games as they are described with a detached, almost gleeful tone. The section also explores the narrator's conversations with Jamie in the local pub, which move from casual topics to darker philosophical musings. The dialogue between them serves as a commentary on madness, power, and survival. As they discuss the nature of the mad, they touch on the idea that the powerful, those who control others, might be the true survivors, the ones who dictate the course of events for the masses. This theme of survival, paired with the narrator's thoughts on their own eccentricity, creates a curious tension. The narrator seems to both embrace and reject their own place within this system of dominance and chaos. The conversation shifts to broader reflections on humanity and survival, with Jamie laughing about the nastiest people surviving, a nod to the harsh, unyielding nature of those who rise to power. The narrator's day continues with a return to their obsessive rituals. They work on the factory, continuing their attempts to control and manipulate life and death through this contrived system. The factory, which the narrator describes as both beautiful and deadly, serves as a symbol for their ability to influence outcomes, providing answers about life, death, and fate. The narrator prepares for another consultation with the factory, hoping it will guide them in their actions and decisions concerning Eric. This eerie anticipation builds on the idea of fate and the need for control, as the narrator continues to use the factory to shape their understanding of their world. The narrative builds on themes of power, control, and the violence embedded in the narrator's worldview, tying them into their complex and disturbing relationship with Eric. The narrator seems convinced of their own power over life and death, a belief that is intertwined with their belief in their own masculinity and their role in the world. The tone remains chillingly detached, with the narrator almost casually discussing their violent actions and the broader implications of their worldview. This section deepens the sense of unease surrounding the narrator, showcasing their warped sense of identity and their obsession with the factory as a tool for understanding and controlling their fate. In the Wasp factory, the narrator starts the morning with an eerie calmness as they prepare for another consultation with the factory, a twisted device they've created for controlling life and death. Their meticulous ritual of tending to the wasp, placing it in the factory, and triggering its eventual demise reveals a disturbing mix of obsession and control. The factory itself is described as a complex contraption built around a clock face, with several rooms designed for various methods of killing the wasp. Each path the wasp can take offers a different death, from drowning to being boiled alive, and the narrator's involvement in this process ranges from passive observation to active participation, such as using their own urine in the gents chamber or igniting the fiery lake. The factory, made up of carefully curated objects from the narrator's violent past, such as the skull of the snake that killed Blith and fragments from the bomb that destroyed Paul, symbolizes the narrator's need to maintain control over their environment and the creatures that enter it. The narrator explains the reasoning behind these objects. Each one represents a past killing, a symbol of their actions that have shaped their identity. They seem to take great pride in the factory's intricate design and its capacity to determine fate, even as it reflects the narrator's deep connection to death and destruction. The narrator's obsession with the factory grows as they reflect on its perfection, seeing it as both beautiful and deadly, while contemplating how it influences their understanding of life and death. The wasp, as a symbolic subject, represents both the fragility of life and the narrator's power to shape its end. When the wasp meets its end in the fiery lake, its death mirrors the narrator's need for closure in their twisted rituals. The narrator's reflections, while chilling, are almost poetic, offering a glimpse into their psyche where death is a calculated art. Later, the narrator attempts to reach out to their brother Eric, who is spiraling further into madness. This attempt to connect, juxtaposed with the narrator's earlier ritual of death, hints at their fractured relationship and the growing tension surrounding Eric's impending return. The phone call with Eric is filled with confusion, frustration, and hints of unsettling madness as Eric's bizarre remarks and unpredictable behavior only increase the narrator's unease. The conversation reflects the deepening rift between them, showcasing the narrator's struggle to understand Eric and their attempts to control or predict his chaotic nature. In this section, the themes of control, power, and the manipulation of life and death dominate the narrator's actions and thoughts. The factory becomes a physical manifestation of their disturbed mind, embodying their need to impose structure and finality in a world they can't fully comprehend. The writing is rich with dark humor, irony, and a sense of tragic detachment, which underscores the narrator's fractured understanding of themselves and their relationship with those around them. In What Happened to Eric, the narrator reflects on their relationship with their brother, Eric, and the unsettling transformation that occurred in him over time. Eric, once a bright and sensitive boy, went away to study and left the island, where he had spent childhood summers with the narrator. As Eric pursued his medical career, the narrator, despite their own feelings of isolation, admired him and continued to follow him like a shadow. However, Eric's departure and his experiences outside the island led to a shift in him. He returned a changed man, and the bond they once shared began to unravel. The narrator recalls this shift with a mix of sadness and understanding, acknowledging that Eric was doing what he had to do, but also feeling the loss of the connection they had as children. The story of Eric's breakdown is tragic. The narrator recounts a letter from a nurse explaining that Eric's trauma stemmed from a horrifying experience in a hospital ward. There, amidst his migraines and emotional turmoil, Eric encountered a child with severe deformities whose skull was infested with maggots. This traumatic event seems to have shattered Eric's fragile psyche, setting him on a downward spiral. He becomes withdrawn, turning to alcohol and drugs, and gradually alienating those around him, including the narrator. The narrator's depiction of Eric's mental and emotional collapse is heart-wrenching. Despite his suffering, Eric's behavior becomes more erratic, culminating in violent and disturbing acts such as setting fire to dogs and terrorizing children in the town. The narrator contrasts Eric's slow decline with their own sense of stability on the island, where they retreat into their rituals and the cold comfort of the factory. While Eric's descent into madness accelerates, the narrator seems to find solace in their control over life and death through the factory. The island, with its isolated and controlled environment, offers a stark contrast to the chaos and suffering Eric experiences in the outside world. The narrator's reflections on Eric's state of mind, their own feelings of inadequacy, and their relationship with their father deepen the emotional complexity of the narrative. The ongoing tension between the narrator's need for control and their inability to save Eric creates a haunting emotional undertone. Through powerful, vivid descriptions, Banks explores the theme of mental breakdown, the impact of trauma, and the way individuals cope with the unraveling of their identity. The narrator's observations on Eric's journey emphasize the destructive power of unresolved emotional turmoil, while also revealing the narrator's own struggle with their place in the world. The chapter reveals the depth of their fractured relationship, offering a tragic, poignant look at the consequences of personal and familial trauma. The writing, filled with dark introspection and poignant moments, invites readers to consider the devastating effects of mental illness and the difficulty of understanding and accepting the chaos that can shatter a person's life. In Running Dog, the narrator recounts the continuing mental decline of their brother, Eric, which seems to have been set off by a traumatic experience while working in a hospital. The narrator reflects bitterly on Eric's transformation from a sensitive, intelligent young man to someone unrecognizable, even as they still feel a sense of attachment to him. The event that shattered Eric's psyche involved witnessing a horrifying scene in a hospital. A child, suffering from severe deformities, had maggots in its skull. This graphic, disturbing image triggered something in Eric that pushed him towards madness. The narrator, in an almost detached way, explores the causes of Eric's collapse. They blame not only Eric's own sensitivity and nature, but also their father's unconventional upbringing of Eric, allowing him to dress as he wished and creating an atmosphere of permissiveness that led to Eric's vulnerability. The narrator's resentment toward their father is palpable, as they hold him partly responsible for the series of events that led to Eric's breakdown. The narrator also exhibits a sense of superiority over Eric's sensitivity, suggesting that Eric's inability to cope with the cruelty of the world is a flaw, one that the narrator, in their obsession with control and detachment, believes they have transcended. The day unfolds with the narrator walking across the island, observing the landscape through binoculars, reflecting on their own loneliness and thinking of Eric. The hot, oppressive atmosphere mirrors the simmering tension the narrator feels about Eric's return. As they walk, they pass familiar sights, places connected to their past, and they briefly contemplate the emptiness of their existence. Even the dump, once a source of fascination, now seems uninspiring to them. Their restless energy pushes them to keep moving, though the heat and the discomfort become a metaphor for their internal turmoil. During their walk, the narrator stumbles upon a dying dog, burned and nearly unrecognizable. The gruesome image of the animal writhing in agony only increases the narrator's sense of dread. The dog's suffering becomes a focal point for the narrator's anxiety, symbolizing the violence and destruction that has seeped into every corner of their life. They take action, trying to put out the flames and bury the dog, but the memory of it lingers, adding to their unease. The tension escalates when the narrator returns home, where a phone call from Eric leads to an intense exchange. Eric's erratic, almost manic behavior on the phone, mixed with his incomprehensible ramblings, further illustrates his unraveling. The narrator, driven by a mix of frustration and concern, demands that Eric stop harming animals and children, an attempt to assert control over the chaos Eric brings with him. The call ends abruptly, and the narrator is left with a sense of impending doom. The narrator's relationship with their father also seems to deteriorate further, marked by silence and an unsettling quietness that hangs over their household. Despite all this, the narrator is left to confront the reality of Eric's return, filled with dread, yet unable to fully grasp the depth of the madness unfolding. The chapter explores themes of power, control, and the collapse of family bonds, while the haunting images of suffering, like the burning dog and Eric's mental deterioration, linger in the reader's mind, enhancing the growing sense of unease. The writing is sharp and atmospheric, brilliantly capturing the narrator's detachment and the disturbing undercurrents of their world. In The Prodigal, the narrator's day is filled with unsettling routines and ominous observations that hint at impending chaos. After waking from a restless sleep, they engage in the same rituals that seem to offer comfort amidst their inner turmoil, tinkering with the factory, inspecting the sacrifice poles, and testing their shooting skills. These acts, while seemingly mundane, reveal the narrator's obsessive need for control and their inclination toward violence. As they make their way across the island, they notice the familiar signs of life: sheep grazing, birds flying, and the distant hum of machinery. Yet nothing feels quite right. Their movements, though calm, reflect a growing sense of unease, as if something crucial is just out of reach. While on their walk, the narrator briefly notices a dead gull and buries it near one of the poles, adding it to their collection of symbolic acts. They also encounter Mrs. Clamp, whose conversation about a missing dog subtly hints at the disturbances creeping into the narrator's world. Despite the seemingly normal flow of daily events, there is a quiet undercurrent of dread, as the narrator spends more time reflecting on the changes in their family dynamic, particularly their relationship with Eric. In an especially tense moment, the narrator reflects on their father's behavior, noticing an empty whiskey bottle and a phone off the hook, suggesting that Eric might have made contact. Their father, clearly drunk, seems disconnected, further adding to the narrator's sense of isolation and suspicion. This tension builds to a breaking point when the narrator discovers that their father is possibly hiding something, triggering a frantic search through the house. They find disturbing items in their father's study, including tampons and hormone boxes, leading to a shocking realization that unravels the fragile narrative the narrator has built. The moment of truth comes when Eric appears, not as a long-lost brother, but as a chaotic force wreaking havoc. The house becomes a battleground as Eric's violent actions escalate, burning sheep and threatening to destroy the narrator's carefully constructed world. The chaos culminates in an explosive confrontation, with Eric seemingly hell-bent on destruction, while the narrator scrambles to stop him. The imagery of the burning sheep and the fire that consumes everything symbolizes the narrator's inner turmoil and the destructive consequences of their actions. As the night draws to a close, the narrator's shock and horror culminate in an unsettling final interaction with their father, who holds out a bizarre and grotesque object, a symbol of the dark secrets that have been buried for far too long. The reader is left with a chilling sense of the fragile, broken relationships within the family, and the narrator's descent into madness is further deepened by the traumatic revelations of the night. In What Happened to Me, the narrator experiences a moment of profound revelation as they reflect on the truth behind their identity. The calm, clear day on the island contrasts with the intense emotional turmoil the narrator faces after their father's confession. This chapter brings the long, hidden truth to the surface. The narrator is not the person they thought they were, but a woman. The realization hits hard. Everything they believed about themselves, their body, and their masculinity is shattered. The tampons and hormone treatments, once thought to be for Eric, were actually for the narrator, orchestrated by their father. The physical traits they've attributed to their unique identity, such as their beard and lack of menstruation, are the result of years of hormone manipulation. This admission from their father uncovers a grotesque web of lies, deception, and forced gender transition, deeply affecting the narrator's sense of self. The narrator reflects on their violent acts, the murders they committed, which they believed were acts of revenge, stemming from the jealousy of not being able to create life. They come to realize that their crimes were born out of the anger and frustration of not being able to fulfill what they mistakenly thought was their role in the world. The factory, their strange and ritualistic mechanism for controlling life and death, becomes a metaphor for the narrator's internal world, a world where control over death was easier than understanding or accepting life. Through this devastating revelation, the narrator recounts their history of violence and confusion, noting how their actions were a result of their father's twisted experiments and their own confused understanding of gender. The narrator's internal monologue is poignant and reflective, filled with a mix of anger, disbelief, and a sense of betrayal. Despite the horrifying truth about their past, the narrator attempts to reconcile with their identity, finding solace in the thought that, in the end, their journey is still their own, altered, but still theirs to live. The theme of identity, both constructed and discovered, is central to this part of the novel. The author masterfully explores the impact of forced identity and manipulation, as well as the tragic consequences of familial betrayal. The writing is poignant, introspective, and filled with raw emotion as the narrator confronts their truth, and the calmness of the island contrasts starkly with the storm brewing in their mind. This moment of revelation ties together the narrator's journey and their violent past, leaving them to confront the reality of who they are and what they've become.